So yesterday was the first Republican primary debate. It was on Fox News. They had the kids' table debate earlier on in the night, and then they had the main event, if you will, at about 9 o'clock. Carly Fiorina destroyed in the first debate. Rick Perry looked like he was high on Percocet the entire time. Rick Santorum didn't know whether he was coming or going. Lindsey Graham kept bringing up ISIS because he's Lindsey Graham and he can't help himself. Nobody really answered the questions. So Carly Fiorina, according to all of the polls afterwards, crushed. In fact, I think there were 7 people in the debate, and the last poll I saw, it was 43% of the people who watched said Carly Fiorina won. So that might get her into the next big-time debate. In fact, it likely will. And we'll see what channel that's on and when that's happening soon, I'm sure. But let's get to the main debate here because there's so much to talk about there. So I'm going to give you my initial reaction, my gut reaction to the debate, and then I'll get to some poll numbers, the snap polls that happened right after the debate. And as I'm going through this here, just keep in mind, I'm not analyzing this through the eyes of what my political views are, because everybody already knows who I think is the most reasonable candidate on stage and who's better on the issues and stuff like that, and who's the most ridiculous. So that's irrelevant. How I tried to analyze this debate was through the eyes of your average Republican voter. Now, also when I say that, I don't mean the dumbest, furthest right-wing Republican voter. I mean your average Republican who would actually go to the polls to vote and is picking a candidate, and they come into the debates fairly undecided. So trying to look at the debate through that lens, here was my initial takeaway. So first of all, who do I think won? I think it was John Kasich, believe it or not. Now, I was joking before the debate a lot about John Kasich, because who the fuck knows who John Kasich is? There was something that was really heavily in his favor, though, which is that it was happening in his home state. And you could tell that the audience knew, like, hey, this is our governor, this is our boy, let's cheer a little extra for him. But honestly, even without factoring that in, I still think he won the debate. And I think that's the case because he was concise, he was authoritative, and he also wasn't pandering. There were a couple issues where he kind of like unapologetically took a centrist stance and maybe even a center-left stance, but he framed it in a way as if to suggest that he's still with the Republican Party. He walked a tightrope there, and he did a fantastic job in doing so. Let me just give you one example here off the top of my head. He spoke about gay marriage at one point, and of course, since he's running in a Republican primary, he was wrong on it. He said, I'm a traditional guy myself, so in other words, I'm against gay marriage. But then he went on to talk for like 3 minutes about how, look, if I love somebody and they're in my family or they're a friend and they're getting gay married, I'm going to go to the wedding. And I think he said, I went to one recently. So I got nothing against him. People don't have to be exactly like me, and they don't have to agree with me on everything for me to respect them. And he said something like that, and believe it or not, the crowd really clapped a lot, and that actually shows how far we've come on that issue, because the polls now, 59% of the American people, 61% of the American people are for gay marriage. The younger Republicans, a majority are in favor. And even in the overall party now, I'm not sure it's at 50% yet, but you're nearing it. And John Kasich was not pandering, and he did a fantastic job. And as we'll get to in the polls in a little bit, it kind of reflected in the polls too. In other words, it's not just my takeaway where I thought he did well. A lot of people kind of agreed. So he just made himself a real contender here. We'll see what happens moving forward, but I think John Kasich won the debate. Coming in second, it's a tie, I think. Trump, and, you ready for this? This is left field, because the polls did not reflect this at all. So again, I'm giving you my gut reaction through the eyes of what I think is your normal Republican voter, okay? And then we'll get to the polls in a little bit, but I think tied for second is Trump, because he came in there with a fucking anvil and dropped it on everybody's head, and Jeb Bush. Now, again, the polls disagree. Jeb came like damn near last in every poll, but there's a reason why I'm saying this, guys. Because remember, in 2012, for example, Mitt Romney was not registering in the early debates. A lot of people were like, yeah, not interested. He's too boring, he's too establishmenty, he's too presidential, if you will. that's what I saw in Jeb. A lot of people are saying, "Oh my God, he was so weak. He wasn't strong on anything. It looked like he wouldn't even vote for himself." Those are the criticisms people are giving, and they're not even necessarily wrong. But I'm looking at Jeb like Steady Eddie here, where he's going to continue with this boring role, and he's going to play the boring role. And if everybody else self-destructs as time goes by, he's unfortunately going to be one of the last men standing because he's got the legacy name, and he's like the fallback. He's like the default. He's like, to the Republicans, he's the equivalent of like the old boyfriend that they can't get away from, or the old girlfriend that they can't get away from, and they'll go and hook up with other people, but then eventually, okay, we got to go back to the bush because, come on, it's the bush. So he's going to be there. It doesn't reflect in the polls right now, but that's very similar to Romney. He's just going to float around until later on he might actually make a run, which is fucking terrifying. Trump, like I said, I mean, the guy was just fucking balls to the wall, crazy, and so obnoxious. But people love it. They can't wait to support somebody who dares to break free of the traditional mold, and that's kind of what Trump offers. That and his confidence is something that I think made it so that he came in second, even though he stumbled up and never answered any fucking questions and stuff like that. Third place, Marco Rubio. I'm bored to death of him. I'm tired of him. He started out really fucking nervous, like he almost always is, because he's an empty suit. But he kind of settled down as the debate went on, and the polls are reflecting he did well as also. Again, we'll get to that. Fourth, I think Scott Walker, incredibly boring, but steady. Now, the polls disagree with that one, and he came near the bottom as well. We'll get to that. Chris Christie, I think he was tied for fourth with Walker. He underperformed. The audience didn't like him, but he's got a Trump-esque style to him, which might make it so that later on he'll make some noise. But again, we'll see. Number 5 is Huckabee. I think Huckabee was very honest, one of the most honest people on stage, but he's obviously way too far right-wing on social issues. And 6, I have Rand. This breaks my heart to put him this low, but what I took away from it is he was trying to be somebody he's not. He sees that he's not as high in the polls as he would like to be, so he tried to like make a move. It didn't work, man. Like he came out, for example, at the beginning of the debate, they asked the question, will you guys vow not to run as an independent candidate and support whoever the eventual Republican nominee is? Trump said, no, I might run as an independent. And Rand Paul just like jumped into the conversation and just started screaming at Trump. Now, that's something that maybe some people might like when they watch it, but it just struck me as like, calm down. You're getting too involved. You're a little too loud, a little too obnoxious, a little too sharp in your tone. That's not his character. That's not who you are. And it just looked like you were trying to be somebody you're not. So unfortunately, I don't think he performed very well. We'll get to an interesting moment later on where him and Christie went at it over the NSA. Number 7, I have Cruz. Because Cruz, I mean, even my friend, who's not even really all that into politics, texted me about Cruz. He said, this guy is so smarmy and so sleazy, he just looks like a liar. He looks like he's been practicing in front of his mirror for the past 8 months. So Cruz, I think, did terrible. And I have Ben Carson. Because, and I hate to use these words, but it just really struck me like that. He's way too partisan. And again, we'll get to that too. But he's also, I think, just super unpresidential. Now, you might say, Kyle, Trump is unpresidential also. But he has the saving characteristic of, like, the over-the-top confidence, which people like. Carson is just none of that. He's just too partisan and way too unpresidential, where I think your average Republican voter, not the ultra-right, but your average Republican voter who went into the debate undecided will go, nah, nothing there. There's just nothing there. Okay, so that was my initial takeaway, how I viewed it through the eyes of your average Republican voter, if you will. And now, let's go to the official reactions. These are the polls that came out directly afterwards. So the Time online poll, by the way, I don't know how many of these are scientific. It might be that none of them are scientific. But either way, I do think they're fairly accurate either way, though. I think that this is fairly spot on. So Trump won in the Time online poll with 47% of the vote. Come again? 47%. There were 10 people on stage. 10 people. He got almost half. There are 10 people on stage. He got half the people. Half the Republicans were like, Trump wins. Trump, honestly, in all seriousness, I think Trump might have won the debate with just like one of the first punchlines he threw out there. When Megyn Kelly was talking about how anti-woman he is and said, oh, you call women fat pigs, this and that. And Trump is like, just Rosie O'Donnell. The audience was like, oh, fuck Rosie O'Donnell. Yes, I love you, Trump. You win. Seriously, I think that a lot of people viewed it that way. So, Trump 47%. Carson and Rubio, I don't know where that came from, at 11%. So they're tied for number 2. Kasich at 9%. So there you go. Kasich performing well, like I said. Bush, Cruz, and Paul at 5%. Christie and Huckabee at 3%. And Walker at 1%. Ugh. The Drudge poll has Trump 46%, crushing. Cruz at 14%. That's specific to Drudge, by the way, because Drudge is the, also smarmy right-wing asshole, so the people who read Drudge are more inclined to vote for Cruz, so just keep that in mind. So you have Cruz 14%, Rubio 10%, Carson 9%, Kasich 5%, Paul 6%, Walker 4%, Huckabee 3%, Bush 2%, Christie 1%. And then the Slate poll has Trump 39%, still tremendous victory, Rubio 12%, Kasich tied for second 12%, Carson 11%, Cruz 6%, Bush and Paul 5%, Christie 4%, Huckabee 3%, Walker 2%. So, here's the main takeaway, man. Kasich's not fucking around, and Donald Trump is not somebody who's a fluke. He's just not. I said previously, and I'm going to stand by this, that he's the Newt Gingrich of this election. So Newt Gingrich came in there guns blazing, crushed everybody in the debates, and he had his moment. I think Donald Trump is going to have his moment, and it might even last longer than Newt Gingrich's moment. Now, Newt Gingrich was number 1 in the polls and did win a couple primaries. I think the same thing might happen with Donald Trump. This really is a crushing victory, and none of the Republican voters really give a fuck about facts. And they just like the fact that he doesn't give a fuck about political correctness. In fact, he quite literally said that at one point in the debate when they brought up his record of saying fucked up shit. He's like, I think the American people are tired of political correctness. They're, oh yeah, fuck political correctness. So those are the two main takeaways, and my sleeper takeaway is counterintuitive because nobody else seems to agree, but I'm telling you, keep an eye on this. Rubio, Walker, and Jeb, they're sleeper candidates. They're not registering, overly well now, but as time goes by, they might be the fallback plan that a lot of your average Republican voters go to.